Tonight on Need to Know, she's a pastor, an activist, and a seeker of justice. We talked to the Reverend Myra Brown of Rochester's Spiritus Christi Church about the fight for racial reconciliation and inclusion. That's next. Also on the show, innovation for the future and nostalgia for the past were the guiding forces of fashion in the 1850s. A unique exhibit connects us to a time long, long ago that has relevance in our society today. Don't go anywhere. An all-new Need to Know starts right now. The Reverend Myra Brown made headlines when she became one of the first African-American women in the U.S. to be ordained as a priest. That was back in 2017. Today, after nearly 30 years in ministry, she continues to champion racial justice work throughout Rochester. Armed with a congregation of 1,500 people, the senior pastor of Spiritus Christi Church is on a mission to help bring racial reconciliation and justice to our community. In a region that has long been called segregated, both racially and economically. What does the work for justice and healing look like today, and what gains are being made? Joining me to discuss this topic and much more about her work is the Reverend Myra Brown, and welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
It's good to be here. Thank
so
you for having me.
Before we jump in, I understand there are some people, and they're likely scratching their heads, and they're saying, wait a minute, I didn't know the Catholic Church is now allowing female priests. So just to clear that up, I should explain the Roman Catholic Church does not allow women to be priests, but Spiritus Christi is an independent church, and it's one that's not recognized by the Vatican. So I just want to clear that up for people. So when you were first called to the ministry, did you imagine that a day would come when you would be ordained as a priest?
I didn't. You know, I mean, you never know these things. You kind of hear the call from God, and then you say yes, which I did say yes. And then you wait for God to open the doors. And so that's kind of been my life. You know, I remember the day that the first priest, it was actually a Catholic priest who asked me to preach my first sermon. And I said no. And he said, well, don't say no yet, you know, go home and pray about it first. And I was pretty sure I was going to go home, pray about it. God was going to say no, and this guy would get off my back, right? But I did. I went home and I prayed, and to my surprise, you know, I had a really amazing experience, spiritual experience with God, where I was vacuuming, and I felt a tug in my shirt. I looked down, there was nobody there. I kept vacuuming, and it happened again, and I knew God was calling me. So I went back to my room, I dropped to my knees, I said, God, are you calling me? And I heard this voice that said, yes, I've called you to teach and preach my word. And I said, you can't. I'm Black, I'm a woman, and I'm Catholic, and they don't do that. But I learned from a very wise godmother of mine that when heaven is silent, because God didn't say anything after that, if heaven is silent, that means God said it and that settles it. And so I said, fine, if that's what you called me to do, then I need a covenant from you, God. I need you to give me everything I need to do it, and I need you to open the doors for me so that I can walk through them and meet you on the other side. And that's really how I found my call, is walking through the doors that God opened over those many years after that in my life. And I walked through them, and there were new opportunities and additional opportunities that led me finally to Corpus Christi to minister, to be hired as a minister on their team, their pastoral team, for 7 years. And then, of course, we split from the diocese because the church was too inclusive of women and gay people and Protestants. And then, you know, they kicked us out. We started over. God took care of us, and we've been, you know, functioning as an independent Catholic church for 20 years. And even that, so it was actually a couple couple of years ago that another door opened for my ordination, which is the Roman Catholic Woman Priest movement that's happening. And so I chose a bishop who is a woman from the Roman Catholic Priest movement. She ordained me in 2016, and here I am.
Here we are. Well, you are considered a champion for racial justice in our community, and you lead the racial justice ministry at Spiritus Christi.
Yes.
When you look at where we are in our community racially, what do you see?
Yeah, I see a still pretty divided community around race. I think what I'm encouraged about, though, is I think there's more of an awareness that we have a problem. I think there was a time where we were in, Rochester was in kind of denial, you know. We tout being the place of Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony, but really reluctant to excavate our own history around race and the struggles that we're having. I don't think it's a mistake or it's a happenstance that we are now in a place where just about every place we look, they're struggling. All the school districts are struggling with racism, right? Our economic sectors are struggling with racism. Our communities are struggling with racism. The churches are struggling with it. Just about everywhere you look, right? I think racism, it was probably the worst invention of human effort that has ever happened. And it is an invention. It was constructed, right, by our ancestors. And I think anything that we construct, we have a responsibility to dismantle it. It erodes our humanity, right? It reduces the human spirit in such a way that it takes the essence away from people who are made in the image and the likeness of God. And so I think that the church has a call and a responsibility to address racism. All churches, not just ours.
Talk a little bit about what that work looks like in terms of addressing such an issue like this, one that you said we created. How do we end it?
Yeah. I mean, I think first we have to give ourselves to study, right? If we don't understand its history, if we don't understand its creation, right, its transport to the Americas, and so how that got kind of embedded into our social systems and institutions, then we'll just reduce it to sort of interpersonal conflict, which is part of the problem, I think, in Rochester, where people, when you start to talk about racism, people go to a personal place and like, oh my God, they're making a moral judgment about me. You know, I'm a good person. I'm a good person. But racism is a system. Right? It's a system that was constructed that has embedded in it the belief of racial inferiority and racial prejudice about some groups over white groups, right? And so, and all of our institutional life will in some way attempt to reflect that, right? And so we have to begin to address what's in the institutional structures and in institutional walls. And so how we've begun to do that work is at our church, we looked at where our influences are. And I think that's the first place people have to think, like, where are my influences? Where are my circles of influence? For us, at our church, our influences were our pulpit, right? And the work that we're doing within our church walls, our events, right? And so we looked at those two things first, and our mission, right? And our mission to kind of claim the work. And so for us, we started by realizing that I could not be the only priest and pastor and preacher preaching about racism from the pulpit, right? Because that's where we get to influence 1,500 people a weekend, right? We get to put the message out. And so we had to remind people that anti-racism work really is Jesus' work, right? Jesus' mission was, right, to let the oppressed go free, right? To bring good news to the poor. And so this is not a side dish thing to be working on, but it's central to the mission of Jesus. And so we needed to commit, and we did at our church. All of our preachers, if you come to Spiritus Christi at any given time, we will make sure that the issues of race and oppression are part of the messages that we preach, along with everything else. And then the other thing was we needed to get people trained in the work. I spent a year being trained by Crossroads back in 2005. I came back and I began to train.
And tell me a little bit about that, just in terms of the training, what Crossroads is.
Yeah, so Crossroads is an organization that does racial justice training. I believe they're based in Chicago. And I was asked in 2005 to be on a team of 40 people to work with a Catholic reform organization called Call to Action, which is also based in Chicago. And they realized that they were a racist organization, you know, that their everything that they did really came out of thinking about what the white community wanted, what white culture saw as valuable. And they were wondering why they couldn't get people of color to attend their conference and to participate in their conference. And said, well, because everything that you do here sends the message to the white community that we are here for you. Mm-hmm. And so they asked us to help them with that. And so they brought in Crossroads and we got trained, right, and for a year in the history of racism in this country and the struggles that white people have with resistance to doing that work, the struggles that people of color have.
And sorry to interrupt, but
Sure.
considering I know 1,500 congregants, and many of them are Caucasian, so how were they? Were they receptive to this, and were they, in terms of the training aspect, I would have to think that not all of them are aware of something such as implicit racial bias and what that means.
They struggled initially. I mean, I think initially, you know, it was kind of, if I got up to preach, it was like, oh, here's the Myra thing, right? And so it was easy to kind of isolate me in it. Mm-hmm. It wasn't so easy to do once, you know, all of the staff, when, you know, my white colleagues and pastors and preachers joined me in that. And we were fortified. We were together, right, on this, and we were their leaders. And so they began to get it, right? And so it was really helpful to have a team. I think people of color and white people have to do this work together, right, in order to move it, because the system of racism works really hard for us not to have to know and to not give it the attention that it needs. So I think.
Is there an area where you do feel as though, based on the work that you've done, you personally, with the other leaders in the church and with your congregants, is there something that you would say, you know, we are seeing progress, or we feel as though we are seeing change as we really push this conversation forward?
Absolutely. I mean, our parish has done an amazing transformation from when we started this work many years ago. You know, I remember, you know, early on in our journey, even at Corpus Christi, people would come and, you know, we started things like they instituted a gospel choir, right, in this predominantly white church, right? And so we had white members who would sit up front and just put their hands over their ears while the gospel choir was singing. I'd get anonymous notes, you know, that why is that music being sung at our Mass? Why is that person waving their arms in front of our priest, right? We're talking about the white priest, right? And so, you know, why do we have to talk about this? We don't have that many people of color in our congregation. Why do we have to do gospel music? We don't have that many black people in our church. And so it's been a journey that we've walked with each other, and I think it's been important for leaders to stay steady as leaders, right? And because we gave ourselves to the work, we could actually have those conversations, hard conversations with people, right? About equity, right? About justice, right? About humanity, right? About our call to follow Jesus, that it includes all of this, not just the parts of it that we want to pick. And really calling people to the kinship that's in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's really what racial justice work is about.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but before we close, a special thank you to my guest, the Reverend Myra Brown, Senior Pastor of Spiritus Christi Church. And if you want to get involved in the effort to bring racial justice and healing to Rochester through the church's work, go to spirituschristi.org. A new exhibit is giving the public a taste of Queen Victoria's style circa 1850. The exhibit is not just about her taste and style, but also her influence on fashion and the impact of her style on clothing designs and creations in America. The Genesee Country Village and Museum is home to the newly opened costume exhibit, Victoria's Closet, Fashions of the 1850s. Joining me to share more and to discuss the relevance of such an exhibit in today's society is Patricia Tice, curator of the John L. Whaley Gallery at the Genesee Village Country and Museum, and Brandon Brooks, an intern for the gallery who assisted in the production of this exhibit. And welcome to both of you. It is great to have you here for a very exciting topic, I might say.
Thank you. We're so pleased to be here
Oh,
with you.
thank you. So this museum has 3,500 garments and accessories from mostly the 19th century, and many being featured in this new exhibit. And the first question I have is, because I've heard Antiques Roadshow call this one of the finest collections in North America. How did this collection come to be, and how did the museum get it?
Well, this is the Susan Green collection. And Susan and her husband, who are from Alfred Station, New York, spent basically a good 25, 30 years putting this collection together. And what's great about it is it isn't necessarily haute couture. It is what average people, middle-class people would have worn for good, and also for every day. So it's Sunday best and every day.
So in terms of this particular exhibit, Victoria's Closet, tell me a little bit about it. Tell me where the idea came about to focus on this particular topic. And go ahead.
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, it was inspired in part by the series on Victoria, but it was informed by the real-life diaries of Queen Victoria. And by reading the diaries, pardon the pun, but there are all of these interesting threads which really guided the research for the exhibit. Side by side, the material culture, the actual objects which carried those thoughts and trends out. So it was really a wonderful thing to be able to go through her diaries and hear her talk about Balbriggan stockings. And well, it turns out Balbriggan stockings, which were made in Ireland, were also sold in Western New York. And basically, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So if you have a famous person putting her stamp of approval or his stamp of approval on a product, guess what? It tends to go viral.
Exactly.
Only in the 1850s, it went viral by steamship.
Wow. So Brandon, talk to me a little bit about Queen Victoria's style. What made her a quote-unquote style icon? Someone that really had great influence.
Well, two of the great driving forces we study in the 1850s are this innovation, advances in technology, and a very natural reaction to change, which is looking back, so nostalgia. So with Queen Victoria, she and Albert purchased Balmoral Castle in the Scottish Highlands, and because of that, there was this revival, almost a fictionalized celebration of Scottish Highland culture. And part and parcel of that is tartans and plaids. So we see in the 1850s this proliferation of tartans and plaids throughout the United Kingdom, continental Europe, and of course the Americas.
Well, what I would love to do is look at some images that we have, because I'm sure viewers are very curious, and we'll kind of go back and forth, explain a little bit about what we're seeing in each image, and a little tidbit or nugget of information that you think would be good for a viewer to hear. So we've got the very first image that will pop up here. Patricia, tell me about this.
Oh, this is, I think, what a lot of people think of when they start thinking about fashions before the Civil War. The very large bouffant skirt, which was supported by a cage crinoline, the technology you needed to get this look. And it was really a throwback, largely initiated by a friend of Victoria's, Empress Eugenie, to the 18th century. And if you look at some of the styles, you see very French influence from the 1750s, the time of Madame de Pompadour, and also later on Marie Antoinette. And Eugenie just was like the Princess Diana of the time. And it's, I mean, one thing that I think is really fun is she and Victoria were quite good friends. And when Eugenie comes to England and sets foot on English soil, she's wearing tartan. When Victoria goes to Paris, she's wearing a Paris dress. So it's fashion of diplomacy, too. So we're seeing these large skirts and luxurious fabrics like different types of silks and mousselines and barages and very, very fine cloth, which was able to take the really vivid colors that they were developing in the dye industries of the time.
Okay, let's take a look at the next image that we have here. Brandon, tell us about this.
So what we see here on the petticoat in the back as well as the sash on the child is the Royal Stuart tartan. So one of the main differences between tartans and plaids, although they may look incredibly similar or identical, is that tartans are associated with a specific clan or house within the Scottish culture. So we can think of it as almost a sigil for one of the houses on Game of Thrones. So each house would have, or each clan rather, would have their own tartan. There'd be a dress tartan, a hunting tartan, a tartan for war. And these were easily identifiable to the people of the Scottish Highlands. And they became incredibly popular for children, for adults, men and women. So it really is an ageless, a genderless pattern, fashion. We also see it nowadays in the archetypal American lumberjack with his Rob Roy plaid or tartan. We see it anywhere from the counterculture of the 70s and 80s with the punk movement, athletic outdoor winter ventures, even the ubiquitous hipster. Of course, we've all seen them with their tartan and plaid. And this current fall winter 2019 line of Dior is full of tartans, plaids, oversized checks. So the almost co-opted and re-co-opted history of tartan and plaids have really solidified its survival across 3 different continents.
All right, let's take a look at the next image that we have here.
Well, this dress, again, is a throwback to the 18th century in that it has an overskirt which is parted in the middle and sweeps down. That was a reference to, again, a style worn by Madame de Pompadour. And both Victoria and Eugenie sort of bought right into this and, really began wearing clothing which was more elaborate than had been worn in the 1840s, for sure. And you'll notice that there's a very wide collar. By the way, this pink and white dress is also ornamented with lots and lots of ribbon because behind both women was the urge to promote their own nation's textile industry. So Eugenie introduced a lot of dresses decorated with ribbons because it was French silk ribbon and you needed a lot to make a dress like that. And Victoria, on the other hand, was boosting everything from balbriggan stockings to paisley shawls to all of those woolens from the Highlands.
It's quite a beautiful dress. All right, let's take a look at the next image that we have here. And that's kind of going back to that tartan sash that we were able to see before. And let's go to the next one.
Sewing machine. Well, as I mentioned before, all of this very luscious fashion would not be possible without the technology. And in this case, a sewing machine. Very important invention, not just for the production of ready-made clothing, but also because if you were a woman and you operated a sewing machine, this would be the equivalent of running a very complicated computer. It was an economic step up. You could do the work that 8 hand sewers would do, and you would be paid accordingly. So whether you were making ready-to-wear for women in the form of caged crinolines, loosely adjustable clothing like different types of shawls, etc. This was a passport to a better life.
Let's take a look at our last image here. Brandon.
So here we see 2 gentlemen's jackets. The left black wool is from the 40s, and we can see quite a tailored silhouette. The jacket on the right is much looser from the 1850s, made of piña cloth. Now, piña cloth, as the name denotes, is derived from fibers in the pineapple leaf, if you can believe that. And it's such a great fabric in that it drapes and creases beautifully. You can tailor it to the body, but it's also incredibly light and breathable. So this would be something that you could wear on a hot summer's day. It could be seen anywhere from a gentleman on the street to a lady's evening gown in a ballroom. So it really runs the gamut in terms of who is wearing it, where it could be worn. And in the modern production of piña cloth, it grows so quickly. So it's very sustainable, and it's really a cottage industry run by women in the Philippines. Unfortunately, it is under the threat of modern industrialization, but it really is a fabric that has survived almost 250 years and is still in use today.
Talk a little bit about the relevance of this exhibit to our society today, and what ways do you see those connections that you think people should be aware of that they might not initially see?
Well, one instance of that is I think Americans have always been concerned about the safety of the products that they consume. And you'll see I'm wearing a nice green top here today. And green became a popular color. And there were a number of ways to get it, but most of those ways were very fugitive. You could throw something in a vat of indigo dye and over-dye it with yellow to turn it from blue to green. You could use chrome minerals, but the easiest way of doing it was using arsenic-based dyes. Now, in many cases, the arsenic was friable, meaning it flaked off. So if you were applying it to wallpaper, brushing up against it, you could absorb arsenic into your skin. And if you're wearing green socks, which were dyed by arsenic, or perhaps green gloves, or if you were, more importantly, a worker who worked constantly with arsenic, it could cause quite a sickness and in some cases death. And the flower girls, meaning the girls who made artificial flowers and they were using velvet stems which had a top dusting of green arsenic-based dye, they were the ones who suffered, along with the printers and the dyers who worked with these materials. And as early as the 1850s, there were people in Germany and in London writing to people over here saying, this is a real problem, it's a threat to health. And unfortunately, both people in the United States and Britain, they continued to use it until about the 1890s. So, you know, you see this parallel all the time. The other thing, which I think is pretty interesting, is in the 1850s, it was fashionable to wear a mantle. And this is very loosely fitting. As they came over from Paris and they were basically run up and copied the next day. They were in the streets from American seamstresses, so nothing really changes.
Well, we have to close for now, but a huge thank you to Patricia Tice and Brandon Brooks of the Genesee Country Village and Museum for sharing your time and your expertise with us. So the latest costume exhibit for the museum, Victoria's Closet, Fashions of the 1850s, is now open. To learn more or to check out exhibit hours, go to gcv.org. And that wraps up another edition of Need to Know, Rochester's News Magazine. I'm your host, Helene B. and Duty Hofer. Thank you for joining me tonight and throughout the weekend here on WXXI TV. Have a great night.